Matusik, and next to me is Kerry Henderson. How you doing today, Kerry?
I am doing great. I'm glad you're doing the intro today, Kyle.
Every day it's going to be different, and that's what's going to make this awesome. Today we're evolving our season one, where we're going to talk about introspection and authenticity. The biggest thing we're going to get into today is kind of our stories, how we got to where we are, how we got to the ideologies we are, how we practice them, how we continually work on them, and how we try to provide that in the environments that we're trying to establish for other leaders to grow. So I'm really excited about that, learning a little bit about and setting a foundation for where this podcast is going, our last episode, and then just kind of continuing the conversation and going from there.
Awesome. I'm excited too, because I felt like in the last episode, only having 30 minutes, I could talk all day. And I love that in these podcasts, we can really take our time and in each episode talk about some specifics and get down deeper than surface level stuff. So I'm excited today to talk about our stories, especially your story. I think your story is so important. We talk about introspection and how it plays into authenticity and emotion and emotional intelligence. And it's probably a story that so many in the fire service have, but yours, I like your story because it has a happy ending. It has, you did work and it changed your life. So I'm excited for you to share that.
Yeah, I'm excited too, and I think you hit it on the head that so many people in our industry have similar stories and have dealt with things in their life, and the history of the fire service and how we deal with things has been very destructive, for lack of better words, on how we deal with the hardships of life, and we go into this profession and we have an innate ability to go and see some of the worst things society has to offer, and we can black that out, do our job effectively and very well, and go on to the next one, and that's the life we live. So when things happen to us personally, it's kind of the same thing. How do I black this out, and how do I continue to progress? And a lot of times it turns into some sort of destructive behavior, right? And we see that within the fire service greatly, and we see that in society as well. So it's really understanding that. And, hopefully, I've shared my story a lot of times, and it gets other people talking, which is exciting. And as you've mentioned before, we're going to talk about, soft and safe space. And it's not that, this is very hard stuff to talk. It was very hard stuff to talk about, much easier today. But to truly try to get people to understand who you are and why you were being a certain way and all that. So, it's very exciting and challenging at the same time. But to progress our industry, I think it's very important so we could get away from some of these destructive behaviors.
Yeah. If you missed our first episode, I encourage you to go back and listen to our first episode where we kind of talk about how we ended up here together and why we talk about what we talk about. Kyle wrote an essay about introspection, and you could tell, we couldn't write a 20-page essay. It was only, I can't remember how long they are, but 2,500 words maybe, or something like that. But, Kyle kind of just breaks the surface of his story in there. But I knew before meeting him, then when we first started talking, and when we first put together our presentation that we travel with and talk, I always start by asking him the question is, okay, Kyle, you talk about introspection. I'm guessing something happened and you have this big story. What led you to do all that hard work and tell that story? And so I don't want to waste any more time. Tell the story, Kyle.
So it was a dark, cold December night. No. My story goes back, just like all of us, it goes all the way back to childhood, and it's a lot of things that I just didn't realize. We become this product of the things we see in our life and the experiences that we've gone through. And a lot of us in society, in the fire service, we just become this product, right? And we just survive. And that is not authentic, right? It's everything but. And we just survive and we cope our way through life. And it's seems easy on the surface. My wife and I talk nowadays, and it's like, man, sometimes it'd just be easier to go back the way we used to be. And it's like, yeah, it seems that way, but in all reality, it isn't our true self. And, to do the work is very hard, and to maintain it is also very hard. So it goes back a little bit, kind of that aha moment, rock bottom, whatever you want to call it. My wife and I were trying to start a family, and she had a miscarriage. And I'll never forget that. It was very, extremely challenging time for her. And I actually wrote a blog on that, and I'll share it later. The guy's perspective of it all, and especially being in the fire service, we do this job, and we're supposed to fix things and control things. And this was the situation I could not control and I could not fix. So I was just trying to be the strong one and get us through it, whatever I can do, and everything I was doing was not right, just trying to put more on my plate and figure things out and take care of business at home so she wouldn't have to, when at the end of the day, it's just all she needed was empathy and compassion, but I didn't know that yet. So fast forward a little bit, we kind of get out of our funk a little bit, and we try again, and she had another miscarriage. This one was just very heavy for me, and it essentially took the wind completely out of my sails. But what did I do? I just coped some more and put more on my plate. At this time, we were through our second miscarriage. I was working full-time as a firefighter. I owned a business. I was teaching at the community college. I was a full-time student getting my bachelor's and master's. And it's like, oh, more stress is coming. Let's throw some more on my plate, and I'll get involved in this and this. So, my plate was extremely full, and it was just so I didn't have to deal with what I was feeling. I just could push it aside and keep grinding. You look at the life that I was living, and society says everything I was doing was successful, and I was such a hard worker. But deep down inside, it was everything but, and you could almost take things for the destructive behaviors. Like, that's a destructive behavior, what I was doing. And you look at, drug abuse, alcohol abuse, and all those other things. Just because I didn't choose that doesn't mean that I wasn't hurting, and I think we have to break some of those stigmas as well. So, after that second one, I remember it was kind of when the mental health started making the rounds in the fire service. It was like 2014, 2015, I think, and that became the new buzzword. And we had somebody come and talk to us, a clinician come and talk to us at the firehouse. And I remember sitting in that room, and I felt like I was the only one in that room. And she was literally just staring at me and talking to me. And I was like kept looking over my shoulder, like, who are you looking at? Right? Like, it wasn't me. But I kind of took to heart what she was saying, and eventually I ended up in therapy. And kind of the short version of that, I was in therapy for a total of about 4.5 years. I learned a lot during that time, and I'll tell you, there's going to therapy, and then there's doing therapy. And like for the first 4 years, I was just going to therapy, and then those last 6 months was like, whoa, just completely life changing, and just wow. When you come out of those things, a lot of times the biggest things you start to develop is empathy and compassion. I look back at the miscarriages. That's what my wife needed. That's what I needed. In our industry, I couldn't go into the firehouse and be like, I'm hurting, I'm sad, start crying and all that stuff. Like, you just didn't do that. You're weak, whether you thought you were weak or I'm not strong enough, whatever the case may be. And then through that process, you start learning about the things that happened in my childhood and how that affected me, and, how you're just constantly trying to achieve things, and you have feelings of shame and not being good enough, and where that came from. And you're just like, whoa, this is heavy stuff. And so the culmination of all that is really, I did a lot of work of looking within, like, what happened to me? How do I not let that stuff control me anymore? And then who am I? Like, who am I? Like, what is my identity? And I think you said it, like, when we do this work later in life, not early on and figuring all this stuff out. It's like you're being reborn, and you're figuring things out for the first time, and how you really want to be and how you really want to be portrayed. One of the toughest challenges for me, though, was trying to take on this change while working in our industry. I mentioned that, we get pegged a certain way, and people get this idea of who we are, and they don't let go of that. The biggest challenge was trying to change who I was while everybody trying to keep me the way I used to be. Some people appreciated me being a jerk and how I was, and wanted to just keep me that way and keep the negativity going. And saw my change as weakness, and who is this guy, and he's lazy and his standards are down and blah blah blah. I heard it from both ends, and here you are in this time, and I'll never forget how lonely I felt, because it's like I had nobody that got it, nobody that wanted to get it. And I was just trying to survive, like my head barely above water, just trying to survive and get through this. So like I said, it is one of the most challenging things I've ever done in my life. And for anybody else that wants to, take that introspective journey on learning who you are at your core, it is a challenge. And our culture in the fire service does not make it easy for you to do so. And I think that's why, that's my motivation to continue to go out and speak and meet people and shake hands and do this podcast. It's like, it doesn't have to be that way. We're all broken people, Kerry, right? We're all broken. We all have our own stories. And if we can understand that and have some empathy and compassion for each other, I think our industry would be much better off. What always boggles my mind is we talk about the brotherhood and sisterhood of the fire service. Well, what is that without empathy and compassion? It's non-existent. That's what it is, and I'm getting a little emotional now. And you just talking about, fired up. It's sad because a lot of times we just talk about, these are basic human values. Like this isn't rocket science, what we're talking about. Treating people kind, having empathy. What is that? What does that look like? It doesn't have to be weakness. It's not soft. And we can raise standards through it all. So, that's a quick snippet of kind of my story, where it's evolved, where it's going. The work doesn't stop. It's a constant, it's a constant to keep yourself in check because there's always that draw to go back to your old ways, and sometimes it looks easier. But us being together and speaking keeps me on track, and doing other things. So it's been an exciting journey. It's been, again, the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. And I know there's a lot of people out there with some type of story similar to mine. It doesn't have to be miscarriages. It's, when we look at trauma and stuff, everybody's is individual. But your story is your story, and own it and talk about it and get that support that you need when we talk about mental health and stuff. And, it's shifting that culture. So I hope that answered a little bit of your questions. And, I'm just excited for where we're going, because I think me and you have the capability and the motivation to change and shift a culture to where we can provide an environment for people to grow and learn as people, not just as firefighters.
And I love that every time we talk and every time we share, I learn something new, or I think of something new that changes me. And so you've mentioned before, Kyle, that what percentage of first responders come from a trauma background? It's like all of them.
Yeah, it's pretty much all of them, right? Just, anticipate that. I think some studies said like upwards of 90% of people who come into, fire, police, emergency room, military, come from some type of traumatic background.
Yeah. And it makes sense that you go through these things and you have this trauma and you have no idea personally how to deal with it yourself, because it's hard unless you, like you said, you do that work and work through some of that stuff. But you're drawn to a profession where you can help people immediately, and they're going through crisis. And so that makes sense to me. And another thing, and I've talked a lot about how it's really important before promotion or before a leadership position that you do some of this work, or that you do some work on what type of leader and how you're going to lead and that kind of stuff. Because once you get promoted and you have this crew of people, it's really hard to come in then, 2 years into this position and then do this work and show back up to work the next day and want to be a different person or act or behave a different way, because people want to go, no, that's not you. That's not who you were on Tuesday. Why on Thursday do you want to try to treat me a different way? That's kind of the basis of what I've thought for a long time, but I want to put it out right now to anybody that maybe our two listeners that we end up with, that I think it's important for empathy and compassion that if you have a leader that you're not maybe super happy with, and they come in and they want to change and they're doing work, hey, give them some grace and help them figure that out and come alongside them versus, and I know I can say it for myself. I've had leaders that, you see them come in and they're doing something different. They're like, oh, they must have just taken a class. What is going on? This doesn't feel right. Now, it may not be a perfect fit for them to try whatever latest and greatest thing they've learned. But if they're doing hard work and they want to get better and anybody, I'm talking great, even the greatest leaders that are doing hard work and changing stuff, work with them on that. And that just, it made me think of that, because our stories are similar and different, but I've always had this notion that do the hard work first so that you don't have to come in and after 5-day break be a different person. Because Kyle, you lived that too. Tell that story about you went from jerk Kyle to nice Kyle. And
yeah, I mean, pretty much that's how some of my closest friends will phrase it. If we ever get them on the show, I'm sure that's exactly how they would phrase it. And but yeah, like I said, it presented a lot of challenges, and I think you hit the word perfect. I kind of just perfect grace. Grace was definitely given to me, and I don't think these three people even realized what they were doing. But January 1st of 2018, I got moved shifts. I was not happy about it, and then the three people that used to not like me very much were not very happy about it either. None of us were happy about it, but like something I woke up inside and said, this is an opportunity. And they gave me grace during especially that first year, and we started hanging out away from work, and now they're like the three of my closest friends away from work. Again, I didn't ask them to change, I changed. So they gave me that grace that I needed, and they gave me room to grow. And without them, I don't know where I would be, and I don't know if they even realize the impact they've had on my life and allowing me that space and that room to do so. So if you're listening, thank you. But, and I think that's important. And I think that's important for leaders to know, like, give people grace. A lot of times I'd hear, especially coming out of that journey is, well, I just didn't know. I didn't know how to help you. I didn't know, you didn't say anything. I get that, and a lot of times we keep things close to our chest because we don't want to talk about it, or I thought it was weak. But at the same token, it's like now in this position, like if somebody's not saying anything, but they're acting completely different, I know something's up. So I can approach it, right? And I can approach it candidly and, from a distance and be very sensitive because I really don't know what's going on, but I can start asking the conversations. And it brings us more as leaders. It's very important that we know our people, right? The more we know about them, the more we're able to know when they're hurting or something's off or something's not right. And then we can kind of jump on that and take an empathetic, compassionate approach to it versus what's wrong with you, type hard, just white, rub sand on it type mentality. So, yeah, it's hard to do in our industry to change because you're going to get pulled both ways, and it's going to be a very lonely time for an unknown amount of time as you're getting pulled both ways, wanting to change, and nobody's giving you that grace yet because people may not trust you there yet. And then everybody who liked your old version trying to reel you back into that old ways, and then you're just in this place all by yourself. So that's the loneliness of it all. And how do we progress out of that? And how do we create the environments for people to do so? And it's very important to have those types of environments.
it is. And especially now, I don't feel like, and this may just be my perception from the departments around us, is we don't hang out as much as we used to. In our department, all of us hung out a lot, and we knew each other pretty well, and you know your spouses and kids, and now it's even more important if you're not spending time outside of the firehouse, which I'm not saying there's nothing wrong with that, because that's not for everybody, and prioritizing your personal life and your family, I cannot fault you for that one bit. Part of my story is and is kind of revolves around that. But if you don't know your people well, figure out a way to do that, because like Kyle and me personally, I had 3 miscarriages after I had my son, and how we respond to that is going to be different, and how Kyle responds to that at work is going to be different than Kerry. And for me, if my supervisors all knew kind of what I was going through, but if I'm responding on an EMS call to a woman having a miscarriage, some people might think, gosh, that might be too hard for Kerry. But actually, I wanted to be on those calls because I wanted to provide the support to those women because I knew what it felt like emotionally and physically. But for Kyle, that may have been different. Like, hey, I'm going to check on Kyle a ton more after a call like that because that could be super tough for him to have to go through. But just knowing those things about your coworkers makes you, I mean, yes, it makes you a better supervisor, but it just makes you a better human being is being there, and knowing, what people need and just walking with them, walking alongside them.
Yeah, yeah. We're supposed to be this big happy family, and obviously this big happy dysfunctional family, right?
Yeah.
Let's not kid ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we still could, operate in a smooth and effective way where we're really taking care of each other. When we talk about, mental health and the struggles that we're seeing and suicides, on the surface, when we look at how do we fix this stuff, it's just like you said, be a human being. Like, let's just start there. And that could get us we could travel far ways just on that alone. And it's breaking these cultural norms that we've been entrenched with for years and years and years that we just got to move on from. I mean, it's just not effective, and it's not a way to run an organization. It's not a way to lead people. And we're just seeing the products of these environments, and not taking care of the human behind the badge, essentially, right?
Exactly.
You're just a firefighter, and you have to do this job, and you got to rub sand on it. You got to move on, and don't bring your personal life to work. And I don't care. Like, you got to do this. You got to train this. You got to be this good. And that's where we're drawing our standards. Yet we forget about the human behind it, because on a human basis, we're all the same, right? Our brains are the same. We all have the same things that cause our emotions and how we process things. And we all have heart, lungs, like we're all the same. And, but then we're so differently in our characteristics and how we process stuff. So it's really important that we learn how to establish an environment like that for people to grow in.
Yeah. I can't agree more on that. And I want to go back and talk a little bit about, the difference and similarities in Kyle and I's journeys, and just offer some advice if I can. If we have listeners that are thinking about promotion, or I encourage you to do the work now. Don't wait. It's so much easier, like we just talked about, to get yourself figured out first, before you try to go in and convince some other people to follow you. It's just so much easier. And my story, Kyle and I have a lot of similarities. I talked about my miscarriages, and the way I handled them was very similar to Kyle. Is that I didn't. I was a disaster internally, but I didn't know how to get that out, and so I did probably all the wrong things. I I made work a priority, and my identity was my job. I was on every committee, every work group, every whatever it was that there was to participate in the fire service. That's who Kerry was, and I was still a mom, and I was and that started to really make the shift. Was my son, as my son needed Kerry as a mom, not Kerry as a firefighter, and thank God for him, and for my son coming along, because that changed everything for me. He's the thing I'm most proud of in my whole life. I could win the Nobel Peace Prize, but nothing compares to Nicholas. He I'm sure most moms probably feel the same way, but it changed everything for me. But the other part of my story is that I had some really awesome leaders that I worked for, and I wasn't quite sure what kind of leader I wanted to be. I always felt a little soft at work. I thought, here I am in this male dominated career, all these, ex-military guys, and it's very, paramilitary setup. But I always wanted to know, like, when people screwed up, well, there had to have been a reason. Like, what made them make that decision? It wasn't, people don't just screw up to screw up for the most part, right? But did what was going on? Was there something going on at home with them? Were they not trained enough? Did they not understand the expectation? Did they not understand the rule? Was there too much other stuff going on? And for a long time, I felt like that was soft, and I thought there was no place for that. And I didn't feel good about that style of leadership. But that was who I was, and I knew that. And so I worked for right before I got promoted to captain, I worked for a training captain. Robert Washington works for the city of Williamsburg now, but he used to work in our department. And man, he he basically gave me the business every day. He was tough on me. He set really high expectations for me, but he empowered me to lead the way I was. And you got to have somebody like that in your corner, right? And I was really, really lucky to have him. And just some of the other captains that I worked for on shift work they were just really great about that. And I can say our department is killing it in that aspect of, we do a whole lot of compassion based decision making. I see other departments, and we travel around, Kyle and I do, and I'm on a couple different training officers and safety officers groups where I meet people from all over the state of Virginia. And I listen to the stories about how they're disciplining people for stuff. And I'm like, guys, think about why some of these things are happening and the human side of why you're getting those behaviors, and work with those people in that aspect. And I bet you'll get a different response from them. And if you tie that back into why can't we get people to work in the fire service now? I get it. It's hard to get people to work anywhere, right? Mm-hmm. But in the fire service, we do have a big recruitment and retention issue. But if you look at departments that are changing the way they do business and the way they handle people, not employees, how they handle people, and treat them like human beings, it makes a big difference. We do not have a staffing issue. We actually we have overhire positions that are filled. So we have no vacancies, which, I mean, it's crazy if you change the way we have our problems, don't get me wrong, but I think it goes back to, the human side of things and leading from that way. And that's my story. Is I thought I was too soft for the fire service. And once I realized that it was okay to be compassionate and to have empathy, and it was also okay to have extremely high expectations, because I could help. I could try to understand where you were coming from. And once I knew that, I could set expectations very high for you, because I knew what you're capable of. That's my story.
Yeah, as we travel around, it's fun to see the strengths and weaknesses of states. And, we're speaking generalities, right?
Yeah.
Because we can't pick out every department that we've encountered and networked with. But for me, when I went to Virginia, I was very impressed with a lot of things. And I'm just like, could this ever come to Illinois? And I'm like, no,
yes.
And it's like they get some of this stuff, and it's cool to see. It's very interesting to see what works in other places and like where the struggles are at. Because, like you said, you still have your problems. We're not taking that away. But like, where are the problems at? Like what level? Where does it need to change? How do we progress out of this? And how do we, become ever evolving, is really the question to ask. And it's cool to travel around and see those places that got it, and when we talk about recruiting and retention, and we're going to at a later date, I think the culture is really against pulling people in. Like, who wants to come into this culture? Hey, come to the fire service. You're more likely to get cancer, die by suicide. We're going to force you on 48-hour shifts, and you're only going to know that an hour before you're supposed to go home. So like, come, and they're like, no, I could go sit online and make, whatever. So our competition has changed on how we have to recruit and retain people. And it's about shifting that culture and providing that environment for people to grow in and have a purposeful reason to join an organization such as the fire service.
Yeah, 100%. Because everybody wants to have purpose in their job. I think making money is important. Don't get me wrong, and being compensated appropriately for the work that you do is super important. But having purpose um, is important too. And I think that is how we should always be able to attract people because we provide such purposeful jobs. So, but yeah, you also have to make it an environment that people want to be in because they have to spend so much time together.
Yep, they do. And, it's a perfect time to kind of segue into where we're going next. And we've hit on it a few times talking about a safe space and, soft and using those kind of words. But, next time we're going to talk about how this is not a safe space conversation. And we're going to break down some of those myths for you. And we're going to talk about how, strength really comes from the things that we're talking about. And it's not needing a safe space, it's needing an environment for all of us to grow. So until next time on the Heat of Command podcast, this is Kyle.
And Kerry.
Until next time, we'll see you then.